Our next speaker is Marianne Dickinson. Marianne is the president and CEO of the Alliance for Water Efficiency, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting the efficient and sustainable use of water in the United States and Canada. Based in Chicago, the Alliance works with more than 350 water utilities, water conservation professionals in business and industry, planners, regulators, and consumers. Marianne has more than 35 years of experience in water resources and water efficiency. She's a graduate of the University of Connecticut. She currently serves as the chair of the Efficient Urban Water Management Specialist Group for the International Water Association. She is the past chair of the American Waterworks Association National Water Conservation Division and serves on the boards of the Texas Water Foundation and River Network. She has presented numerous papers on water conservation internationally and across the United States and Canada. And as you can tell, Marianne can't wait to talk to you. So here she is, Marianne Dickinson.
Good afternoon. This is a real pleasure to be following Dr. Jones, and I will do my best to live up to the space following her and to try and keep your interest lively. I always know that the speaker right after lunch experiences that carbohydrate rushing that, you know, tends to make us a little less attentive. So I will do my best to keep you awake and to get you excited about the water and energy issue, which is a passion of mine in particular, but also of our organization, the Alliance for Water Efficiency. If you didn't already hear about it 20 times earlier this morning from Bill Hoffman's talk, and thank you for that, Bill, I appreciate the plugs. We're a nonprofit organization that's advocating and dedicated to the sustainable and efficient use of water in North America, which is mostly where we work in the US and Canada, but we're also international. We have members in Australia and in Jordan and in other parts of the world where the tools that we provide are of use to them. And the water and energy issue is one that we have spent considerable time on, and so that's what I'm going to be talking to you about today, is our water and energy work. Just to provide a little bit of background, you know, we've had a lot of experience in this country with energy conservation programs, 30 years worth of energy efficiency savings that have been documented and have been well deserved and recorded. We've also had a similar pattern of water conservation successes, beginning with some major national droughts that occurred in the 80s and programs that were developed subsequent to that. So we have a lot of demonstrated success. You'll hear about Las Vegas's talk tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, so be sure you're here because it's going to be a good one. And so we have figured out through those two sets of programs that the energy efficiency and water conservation and efficiency are connected. Saving a drop of water does save energy for reasons that we'll talk about in a minute. Saving a unit of energy saves water. But the two communities, the energy efficiency and water efficiency community, traditionally have not worked together in a very collaborative way. We have been in our separate silos for the most part. So we decided it was time to change that, and we initiated a project together with the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, also known as ACEEE, and that's the basis of what I'm going to talk about. So here's a little slideshow that just shows you how water and energy are linked. Energy is needed to run appliances that use water. Energy is needed for cooling purposes. Bill talked about that this morning. Energy is needed to pump water over elevations and also through distribution systems. Energy and water are intertwined in not only the production end of it, but in the end use end of it. If you look at it from a national perspective, this is a chart that comes from the U.S. Geological Survey. They do a report every 5 years on national withdrawals of water. Now, withdrawal of water is different than consumptive use of water, but you still have to have the water in the system to be withdrawn. So it's a very important consideration in power plant siting. So if you look at the national water withdrawals pattern, you'll see all of those orange bars in the chart are all related to withdrawals for thermoelectric power plant cooling. So the most amount of water withdrawn in the United States, and here's a series of patterns over the years showing its growth, has been withdrawing for power plant cooling. If you look at it in a pie chart form, you'll see that the blue area of that pie chart is 49%. 49% of the nation's water withdrawals go for power plant cooling. So, you know, this is a big number, and although it's not consumptive, at least 98, 97% of that water is returned to the system. It's returned in an altered thermal state. It's returned downstream. Again, the withdrawal part of it is still an important consideration. If you look at it from the other perspective, we were talking a minute ago about how much water it takes to produce energy. Now we need to talk about how much energy it takes to produce energy it takes to produce water supply and to treat water, drinking water, and to treat wastewater. This is a very famous chart. It's now, I think, approaching mythic status. It's been in presentations every week for probably about the past 5 years. But this is a chart that shows the work that they did in California, documenting each stage of the water supply, water treatment, and wastewater treatment cycle, and where energy is used in each of those places. It also includes the end-use consumer in that orange box, but that largely is hot water heating in that particular box. But if you take the range of energy that's needed to do this whole cycle, it can be anywhere from 2,000 to 20,000 kilowatt hours for every million gallons of water that's consumed. So that's a very high energy burden. Unless you think that 20,000 is outrageously high and not achievable, I give you my home community of Lake Arrowhead, California, where when they take State Water Project water, their value is actually 24,000 kilowatt hours per million gallons. So these numbers are a range, and it depends on where you are in your local community as to where you fit in that range. So that actually results in a carbon footprint for water. And there was a report done by River Network using the methodology that was developed in California by the California Energy Commission. And in their analysis, applying the California methodology to the whole country, they came up with that for the energy, embedded energy in water, that resulted in about 15% of the nation's carbon load. So as we look toward reducing the amount of carbon emissions in this country, we will need to include the energy that is saved when we don't have to pump and treat and move that water or heat that water at the consumer end use. So this is a significant factor to put into our presentations. So that led us to the project that I mentioned earlier in the talk. We sought out a partner with ACEEE. We got some funding from the Turner Foundation, because the Turner Foundation is interested in energy as well as water. And we decided to pull together stakeholders from around the country in a collaborative workshop in Washington, D.C. to identify what do we need to do in this country to further document and move this energy and water combined nexus. How do we get out of our two silos of the energy community and the water community and pull us all together into one place? So we came up with the concept of a blueprint, that we were going to put together a blueprint for the things we needed to do over the next 20 years, and have these decision makers that we're pulling together into this forum decide how they were going to do that. We had 4 key areas that we wanted to have this group of individuals discuss: programs like energy efficiency programs, policies at the national and state levels, research that needed to be conducted, and how do we better collaborate on codes and standards work for both water and energy. So we wanted this group to discuss those topics, and they did so. We gathered recommendations, and we published a report, which is posted on our website. It all came out of this workshop, which was held December 9th, 2010. We had about 75 key organizations and individuals that were invited to participate in that. And all 75 of them participated in some way, even if they couldn't come to the actual workshop. The workshop that day, we had 54 people representing 41 organizations, and they identified 31 different themes with votes on which was most important. So we came up with a group of 8 different areas of recommendations, and 5 which were identified for immediate action. So I'm going to quickly go through what those 8 recommendation themes are. The first is that we need to increase the collaboration between the two sides. That we can't any longer have energy and water in separate places. In Congress, if there's an energy bill and we want to add water, the energy community is often not very happy to see us coming by and saying, oh, we think water should be added. We need to be doing these things from the start. So we need to set up some working groups to make sure that we're starting to plan initiatives together and to make sure we don't get to that level where we're opposing each other in front of congressional staffers. We need to add water to the traditional energy research and policy programs, and we need to incentivize, especially on the business side, water and efficiency to be included in energy efficiency audits and recommendations from those audits. The second theme was this concept of embedded energy in water and embedded water in energy. We don't have good methodologies for doing this across the country. We have what they did in California. We'd like to see that replicated across the country. The state of Illinois has done that with its water utilities that are participating voluntarily in a survey that was done by the American Waterworks Association Illinois section. But to date, there hasn't really been a lot of other activity in this regard, and we need to develop a national database to do that. And we need to do it especially for the embedded energy in water, because that largely hasn't been done, but to improve the work that's also done on the amount of water that's needed to generate electricity. The third area is replication of best practices. We know there have been great programs done on both the energy and water side, but they've never really pulled those together and talked about what the crossover lessons might be. And so this is one area that emerged as an area of great interest to the attendees, not only to inventory what work has been done, but more especially to promote good examples of where that work would work elsewhere in the country. The fourth recommendation area is to better integrate water and energies, particularly in the need for research. We don't have a lot of research money devoted to this. We need to spend some time as we're siting power plants and as we're moving forward with water facilities and figuring out where the energy connections save money in both places. So that's one area that especially where we're documenting footprinting methods, making sure we have the proper considerations and integrating water and energy in the right ways. One of the themes identified, particularly by the water participants in this workshop, was the area of water pricing reform. How do we incentivize water efficiency when all it does is reduce the revenue for the participating water utility? It's a disincentive for them to participate. Even if they're saving energy and saving future avoided costs, how do you deal with the short-term disincentive of the reduced revenue? So this is an area that emerged as a major theme that needs work. The sixth area was leveraging voluntary standards, and by that I mean USGBC's LEAD program is an example of that. How do we get better integration of water and energy in those types of voluntary standards? And we need to develop better recommendations for doing that, particularly in local land use codes. The seventh area is mandatory codes, where we have water and energy as separate considerations. How do we make sure that they're properly considered together? This morning, Bill talked about ice makers. DOE is setting a standard for ice makers as we speak. Is water included in that standard? No. This is the kind of thing we need to improve going forward. And then lastly, everyone agreed that we needed to pursue more education and awareness of this important topic. The average consumer has no idea that energy and water are really connected. They too get separate bills, and so they think of them as separate resources and separate considerations. So we need to do more to educate our consumers about the tie-in between the two, and to create partnerships between the energy and water utilities to undertake this education. So those were the 8 themes that emerged from this workshop that we did and that are published in our report. It also includes in the report some policy issues for moving forward and requiring government attention and leadership not only at the national level but at the state level. And so there were 9 different directions, policy directions, that were identified in the blueprint, and they ranged from regulatory structures and incentives to specific product standards, building codes, pending legislation that might not have energy in it where it's water, or water in it when it's energy. Tax incentives. We have had lots of consumer rebates and tax incentives for energy efficiency. To date, we have never had one for water on the federal level. So these are the kinds of things we need to start looking at. What about this end-use data? We're relying on organizations like the Water Research Foundation to do this kind of work. This should be something that is of national interest. There should be better communication, better collaboration, and certainly much more coordination on power plant siting. So those were the policy areas that were recommended. But what are we going to do now? Now that we've done the report, what are the most important things to start working on immediately? Of all of this that we've just discussed, you know, there were probably close to 100 different recommendations in this report. What are the ones we need to start on right away? So we identified 5 key priorities to start on, and this is what the work is that we're doing at this moment. First, we need to develop this baseline that I mentioned of how much energy is used by water and wastewater utilities, and then how much water is needed for energy generation development. This national database does not exist, and it needs to be compiled now. We need to make decisions based on knowing what our usage really is. To date, most utilities aren't aware that they are using as much energy as they are because they don't compute it throughout that whole cycle that you saw on the chart. So that's when we identified that we needed to start now. Second one is, how do we incorporate energy and water measures into building codes, equipment standards, and tax credits? We know we have spent a lot of time at the table in all of these processes now. Are we doing a good enough job of integrating water and energy into the two? And so this is an area that we wanted to make sure we started on right away. The third area was surveying programs for best practices, finding those good examples, showing them to everybody else. That's one we wanted to start right away. A fourth area was preparing a report for local and state policymakers on all of this issue related to revenue loss of water utilities, how rates could be set to be more progressive. Can we learn from the energy decoupling experiences and pricing that they have undergone over the past 10 years? Is there a lesson here for water? How do we make sense of this, particularly now as water utilities, after 2 fairly wet years, are all suffering with revenue losses? And then finally, setting up work groups to deal with all of these issues. So given the time, I'm probably just not going to spend a fair amount of time on each of these. I'm just going to quickly go through the slides. And I know the presentation will be available afterwards. I think they're either posting the presentations or the videos on the website, so you'll be able to take a look at the full presentation there. But the first effort is starting the baseline estimates. We definitely want to do that. We're going to be setting up a work group to do that and to clarify how much energy is used by water and wastewater utilities. You heard the statistic this morning that 19% of California's electric energy load is related to the pumping, treatment, and movement of water, and 32% of their gas load is related to the heating of that water. Unless you think that California is on another planet and can't possibly relate to your state, think again, because the numbers that we're seeing being calculated in various places are showing not too dissimilar numbers, certainly over 10% in many cases. 10% of the local electric energy load is related to water in some way, shape, or form. This is not an insignificant number, but we need to know exactly what that number is, and we need to be able to plan for it and to calculate it properly. We also need to do the same for how much water is needed in generating electricity. And there's been more work done on that. There's been congressionally mandated studies. There are reports done by the various labs. Those reports need to, again, have the same sort of methodology and move forward in considering how much water is going to be needed nationally. The USGS report is certainly part of that effort. And how we choose our cooling type is very indicative of how much water we would need moving forward for new power plant siting. Here's a map that shows the regional variations. Obviously, it's much more of a regional issue in water withdrawals than it is in the east than it is in the west. But we need better data, and we need to be mapping this in a much more cohesive way. The second area that we had identified was code standards and tax incentives, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't have any water energy issues slipping through the cracks the way Ice Makers appears to be doing with DOE. So we wanted to set up a work group to specifically work on that right now and to look at what the opportunities might be for new product and appliance standards coming in, new codes that are being developed, make sure that as these codes are being discussed and future modifications made, that the proper synergy between water and energy is being included. We also know that because tax incentives expired at the end of 2011 for residential energy incentives, that maybe this is an opportunity to recraft them moving forward for a combined water and energy incentive. I was visiting one of the senator's staffers who said, well, we can certainly give you parity. If we reduce energy to zero, water will be at parity because it'll be zero too. It's not quite the direction I had in mind, but certainly we're beginning to elevate awareness that both have to be thought of because they're both very much connected. We also need to be examining how these best practices and good programs that have been successfully implemented around the country, how they might be learning lessons for others, because we want more of these programs conducted across the country. And so we want to focus not only on the water supply side, but also on the wastewater treatment side. It's a very energy-intensive treatment process, and depending upon the type of treatment methods chosen, it's a difference in the amount of energy consumed. So what we want to do is highlight a lot of the programs, and there has been a working group set up to do that. And also looking at embedded energy in water and the pilots that have been done will provide some really good information. The California Public Utilities Commission made $10 million available in pilot funding to test out how much embedded energy there is in some of these water conservation programs. And the data that came out of that particular pilot is very useful data that we can use in calculating how much energy you're actually saving. So we need to take a look at a lot more of those. And so there's statistics that came out of that report, including a great calculator. We used a lot of this information in building our own analysis of it in a model that we have that calculates the energy savings from water conservation programs. So this CPUC data is very valuable information, but we need to have it also replicated and studied elsewhere in the country. The fourth area is the area of pricing, and this is one that we, in particular at the Alliance for Water Efficiency, are going to be handling. We're very concerned about the disincentive to water utilities to participate in water efficiency programs because of the reduction in revenue. We know that this is a serious impediment. How we price water in this country is still the same way as we priced it when the systems were built in the end of the last century. We still charge based on unit blocks of water sold. In some cases on a flat rate basis, in some cases even still on a declining block basis. So we need to figure out how it is that we can recover costs from the utilities and still send a positive conservation message to the consumer. We need to look at those water rates, examine what the factors are in this current revenue loss that we're experiencing all around the country. What are those contributing factors, and how do we move forward in addressing those? So we'll be preparing a report and a white paper on that later on this year. And so the four working groups that we've been creating are part of this final recommendation. There are 4 groups that are being assembled. The first one, Code Standards and Tax Incentives, is being run by ACEEE. They've already had one kickoff meeting that was in February of this year. The second group, Water Utility Disincentives, is one that we're taking on, and we'll be calling that work group probably sometime this summer. There will be a summit of rate makers and economists at the Johnson Foundation at Wingspread in Wisconsin to come up with a strategy white paper on it, which the work group will then continue to explore. So that is a group we're managing, and if you're interested in participating in that, give me your card. There's a third group on the Joint Energy and Water Savings Programs. ACEEE is managing that, and they had their first kickoff meeting last week. If you're interested in that, let me know. And then the final group on the research on embedded energy in water, or water in energy, that group is one we'll be assembling probably in another month or 2. So what we want to do here is we want to get national attention for this issue. We really feel that this entire concept is largely driven by energy efficiency policy at the national level. They have been well organized for 30 years. There are at least 3 groups serving the energy efficiency needs that have been in place for 25 or more years. The Alliance for Water Efficiency is the only national organization on this issue now, and we're not even 5 years old yet. So, you know, we have a lot of catching up to do, and we need to make sure that we put water squarely on the plate of everybody in Congress. And how do we get them to focus on it, whether it's in Congress or in the state legislatures? How do we get the research money we need to conduct the work that's important? And one of the vehicles might be a bill that was submitted in this Congress. It's not likely to pass, but it'll come back in the next one. It's Senate Bill 1343, the Energy Water Integration Act of 2011, which was introduced on July 11th by Senator Bingaman. It'll come back, but this is a place where we can put a lot of these initiatives and make sure that forward momentum is happening in the U.S. So what does this bill propose? It proposes studies and research priorities and enhancements on water-related energy consumption, but we want to make sure it actually creates that national database we're looking for, and that it gives us the next steps. What they're calling it in the legislation is a roadmap, which is as good a term as any. So we're hoping that we can get some specificity in that. It's also going to be giving a clean technology grant program and funding that. So the water and energy synergies in that grant program would be very useful to explore. There'll be money for rural water utilities, and there's going to be a comprehensive water use and energy savings study. And so what we want to make sure is that that study becomes very useful, that it's not just another report, but something with some very concrete recommendations. So what's the outlook for 2012? As I mentioned, this bill's not likely to pass in this particular Congress. It doesn't appear that anybody wants to take on something significant before the election. But it'll be back. There's a lot of interest in this topic, and I think there's going to be various versions of this bill in both the House and the Senate. If there's another version of the Homestar bill that emerges, we'd like to see water added to it. That's a bill that would incentivize consumers to do energy efficiency retrofits in their homes with actual outright cash incentives. Water should be part of that. Plumbing products should be part of that. So that's something we'll be working on and paying close attention to. And we want to make sure that as we talk about green infrastructure, that we not forget efficiency as a piece of that. It's not just all about stormwater. It's not just all about energy and sustainable use in buildings. It's about the water consumption as well. And we want to make sure that that's all part of that consideration. So one of the recommendations that we have been talking about, I think, quite a bit today is educating the consumer. And we have decided to attempt to start to do that. And we have launched a website in January of this year called the Homewaterworks website. It's got a calculator, and that calculator calculates the energy savings from the hot water use reduction. So that's a start. We're getting there. Once we get good embedded energy numbers from the water supply systems across the country, we can add the embedded energy from cold water savings into this calculator as well. But we'd like you to go visit it and check it out. It's a zip code-based calculator, so it calculates very precisely, we think, end-use information for the various parts of the country. It's a beautiful calculator, actually originally built by the Field Museum, but we were lucky to join in a partnership with them. We said, we'll fix your background calculations if you'll share your graphics with us. And so they agreed. So take a look at it. It's a terrific site. And here's the URL for it, home-water-works.org. We also have our regular website, which is meant for the efficiency professional, and that's allianceforwaterefficiency.org. And the blueprint is right on our homepage, so we encourage you to download the Blueprint for Action, which is our water and energy recommendations document. And you've got my email there, as well as the emails for AC Tripoli if you want to email them. And so I just want to finish by saying, if you haven't ever heard of the Alliance for Water Efficiency before today, I have brochures. And I would love to make you part of our national network. The more people we have working on these issues, I think the better off we're going to be. So thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Marianne.